an opportunity for us to really, I suppose, reflect on the daily lives of those that are living in the DRC, as a lot of the focus has continued here to be as well on, the sad loss of lives here in South Africa. And we're going to be getting into our panel discussion this evening as we take that conversation forward. I'm joined in studio by Advocate Sipho Mantula, who's an international relations expert. Advocate, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Evening, Naledi and Jumbo Africa, to your viewers.
We really do appreciate it. We're also going to be chatting to Christian Rumu, who is a senior campaigner with Amnesty International. He's speaking to us live from Nairobi in Kenya. But Advocate, let's start with you. I mean, you listen to Malungelo's portrayal of what the daily lives of people in the DRC, in Goma, are living through before what we're seeing of late with this full-scale attack of troops allegedly by the M23 group, to grab full control of the city of Goma. I mean, talk to me firstly about, your response to that, and if you will, regional bodies on the continent are understanding how long these hostilities have been going and why it's important to do something about it as intensities increase.
Naledi, remember that if one has to diagnose the current crisis in Goma, you don't have to Google it. Some of us have been there, and it is a pain that has been there since 1960. But you can take it back, actually, to say the Congo Conference of 1884. The Berlin Conference that decided to partition DRC, the brutal assassination of Patrice Lumumba has created what DRC finds itself in now. And when you look at the right of children, right of women, their rights have been violated since the Berlin Conference. But let's take it back to the 21st century, 1996. South Africa emerges a rainbow nation. That was our first task. We had to intervene after the Rwanda genocide. In 1996, South Africa was thrown into the DRC. So we have 20 years of knowledge, experience of the people of the Eastern DRC, the people of what we call North Kivu, South Kivu, Beni, and many areas, Sake. But again, the other issue is the natural resources. We can say the blessing of DRC is also their case of this conflict. But we have not diagnosed that the pain that these children are facing, it is also the responsibility of their own government, responsibility of the SADC, of the AU. I've looked at, we talk about international community, humanitarian aid. Maybe it's high time that the SADC must wake up and have its own humanitarian body. It's high time that we have at least our own standby force that we have not managed. That's why it was Tanzania, Malawi, South Africa that has been pledging their own solidarity. You have Angola that is currently mediating this crisis, but they are not putting their resources. You have Kenya that is currently engaging as well on this process. And during the time of Uhuru Kenyatta, they have tried. But the question of DRC is the question of the war around natural resources of the DRC. And children and women becomes what I'll call the cannon fodders. They are becoming the victims of the circumstances.
Strong words. The cannon fodder. I mean, that's very concerning. And at some point, we're going to get into whether or not, even the presence of South African troops makes a difference. But we'll do that in a moment. Let's bring in Christian, though. Christian, a good evening to you. We really do appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. I mean, talk to me about, as Amnesty International, as you look on at the intensifying violence in the DRC at the moment, just I suppose the alarm at the moment that would be raised by yourselves.
Yeah, for us, it's really looking at the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Goma right now. That's why we are really calling on all parties in this conflict to prioritize the protection of civilians and ensuring humanitarian access in Goma in particular. Report that we have received for this month in particular, for instance, Médecins Sans Frontières issued a statement saying that there have been more than 400,000 people displaced in January alone due to the ongoing crisis. And as your colleague was alluding to earlier on, this, it's adding to the more than 600 internally displaced people who were already in the outskirts of Goma. So this current situation is creating a dire humanitarian situation in North Kivu that needs to be addressed. And hopefully all parties to this conflict are going to allow humanitarian aid and assistance to go into Goma.
Yeah. And, then it becomes an issue of how difficult it is to bring that humanitarian assistance in when you've got the growing numbers. And then at the same time, there's this fear of even attacks on peacekeepers that are in the area.
Indeed. And we have also, we know for past experiences that in these instances, there are gross human rights violations that occur, including targeted killings of civilians, sexual violence, targeting of activist human rights defenders, and those who are critical of Rwandan actions or M23. So there is a risk not only for this humanitarian aid to access into the city or into the province, but also what other human rights violations that could occur during this period. We continue to receive reports of gunshots in the city of Goma, as well as explosives. It's still unclear where they are coming from, and that is really exposing the civilian population in a very densely populated area like Goma to harm. So it's going to be very crucial to all parties involved to cease this offensive, in particular using heavy weaponry and explosive in this densely populated area.
I want to bring in our other guest. We're joined by Helmut Hartmann, who is a military expert. Helmut, good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. A few media houses have also spoken to Piet Krief, who's the National Secretary of the South African Defence Union, Helmut, and he's quoted as saying, extensive research has been done, and 2 years later we've made similar mistakes as previous sort of deployments. We've sent our troops on a foreign mission without adequate resources, and once again we're seeing heavy casualties. 9 families, South African families, in mourning at this stage. And, we just played clips earlier of a mother who was absolutely devastated. But did you see us getting to this very unfortunate point, Helmut?
I hope we wouldn't, but the writing was on the wall. The original concept of the mission was that MONUSCO was withdrawing and 5,000 SADC troops would do what 15,000 MONUSCO troops couldn't do, which was silly at best. Then you add no air support, and we already saw what happens when you don't have air support in Mozambique, and back in 2013 in Bangui. And after the Bangui problem, the then Chief of Joint Operations, General Mugabe, put his foot down and said, we will never again deploy without our own air support. And that was the Royvalk in the Congo, which did very well against M23 a few years back. When the UN wanted us to withdraw the Royvalk, which was supposedly too expensive, our then Minister of Defense put her foot down and said, well, if we withdraw the Royvalk, the Oryx transport helicopters and the infantry battalion are also going. So the UN backed down. But then, of course, our own defense funding is so measly that we couldn't keep the Royvalk operational, or even all the Oryxes. So now there is no air support. But, in this particular situation, I'm not even sure how much air support would have helped unless it was unleashed early, because once they're in the city, it's getting a bit too late. The real problem is too small a force, and the fundamental issue was that the government seemed to believe or persuade itself that this was a peacekeeping mission. It wasn't. It was a war-fighting mission. South Africa was joining a war against M23 and perhaps Rwanda on the side of the DRC government. It's as simple as that. It's not peacekeeping. Then different things come into place. And if people had understood from day one this is a war-fighting mission, you wouldn't have them sitting in city bases the way they were, surrounded by high ground, in among civilian populations, so they would have picked a different type of base, a different location, much better, easier to protect, easier to defend, things like that. So there was a misconception to start with. There was too small a force. And really, it's actually a run-on. You can go all the way back to the intervention in Lesotho in 1978. And we keep repeating the same mistakes. Just in Burundi, we got lucky it didn't go sour on us. In Bangui, we got lucky because the people on the ground happened to be particularly good, and they weren't quite as overwhelmed as the forces now in Goma were. So we got lucky. This time, we did not get lucky.
And then, of course, before I move away from you, Helmut, I want to bring this in. Because then what you've got is authorities then saying to us today that, well, our troops, as it stands in the DRC, are there, but they are safe. Do you believe that?
Well, given that we've lost, I believe now it's 10 or 11, we've lost a number of people killed and a number of people wounded, they're hardly safe. And there's still shooting going on. I'm sure they're doing their best. And the good news is that M23 put out a statement saying that the Congolese soldiers must hand their equipment to MONUSCO, which suggests that M23 and the Rwandans don't want to get into a fight with MONUSCO, and probably also not with the SADC mission. It would be silly of them to do that unnecessarily. So with a little bit of luck, I mean, there's chaos. When there's chaos, things go wrong. But with a bit of luck, the troops that are still there now should be reasonably safe. But then we do need to take pretty briskly take a decision what we're going to do. Government says we're going to stay in the Congo and help stabilize. Well, really? This didn't work too well.
Okay.
So it's time to take a decision.
All right, I want to take a call. Of course, we're taking calls on 010-594-6010 as we look at violence continuing to escalate in the DRC, particularly in Goma, where The Guardian, for instance, just over an hour ago, reporting that M23 rebels are now claiming victory over Goma, and asking, for your thoughts on whether or not South Africa is making any sort of difference there. Collins is in Mabopane. Collins, good evening.
Good evening, Nalia.
Well, thank you so much for calling, Collins. What are your thoughts?
Now, my thoughts, I need to understand. It looks like South Africans, we don't have an idea with what's happening with the soldiers. Because every time these things happen and we're facing on media and everything. So I'm asking myself, do we need somebody to educate us so that we don't send our kids to soldiers for the payment or for work? It's anybody who can explain to us exactly what is the soldiers, what are the soldiers doing? Because it looks like every time we have incidents like this, due to the fact that we don't understand what is the purpose of the soldiers in South Africa.
That, Collins, is a brilliant question. Thank you so much for that. And that's why we've got Advocate Sipho Mantula here as well to unpack that for us. We'll take Yandisa in Pretoria. Yandisa, good evening. Thanks for calling.
Good evening, Newzroom Afrika.
Thank you so much for calling, yes.
Yes. What I want to say, how can our government send our people, our soldiers there, because they are being sold now? If you look, they are not well equipped against rebels who are well equipped. I think our soldiers have been sold. I am very, very angry. When I heard that I don't know if it was yesterday or before yesterday, I was very, very angry. Because how can there is I hear news that there is no service for the refund. There is no service. It's not serviced. Our plane is not serviced. The helicopter, but still our people now. Okay. We have more soldiers dying there.
Yeah. And yes. Your line isn't great, but I think the point that you made is also very clear, right? Resources, the equipment that they have, is it working? But Advocate Collins asking such an incredibly important question, and I think back to Helmut saying this. His words. This is not a peacekeeping mission, but a war-fighting mission.
I'm not sure about that it's a war-fighting mission because South Africa subscribed to the international law principles of promoting peace, dealing with the crisis that happened, as I said, from 1996, what we'll call the First World War I, where there were more than 9 countries involved there. And I think the role of the soldiers is to serve, protect their own citizens. It's not to protect only the minerals of certain families. It's to protect the nation. And secondly, I think the role of South Africa, it was supported by when they had to mediate in the Congo in 2001. And since then, we've been engaged in the DRC, including Sudan, including CAR. And in all those instances, we had Europeans. We had the Belgians who have been there since 1884. And nobody talks about atrocities that have been waged by Europeans in Congo, including the tech companies who have benefited in Goma, in the Eastern DRC. Yes, there's a question of humanitarian aid, the responsibility to protect the citizens. But also, when you look at the issue of funding that we have raised, it is not the issue of funding only. It is the issue even of the attitude and the issue of conduct of our military, that they have to move with time and space of technology that is moving into the military space. We had our drones there, but we were told they were not licensed, they should be pulled back. But the rebels use drones. They don't care about the law. They know why they are there. But I think for us, it is a misnomer and a misrepresentation that when we put our army in the peacekeeping missions, we are there for a certain interest. There's only two we have. It's our national interest, it's a regional interest, and also it's a continental interest, because we are part of the AU Peace and Security Council, we are part of the SADC, and DRC, it is part of SADC. But like I've said earlier, it is the question that in the DRC, you have hidden faces and hands that have been involved. Even during 1994, when we had our own democracy, there was genocide happening in Rwanda. The then apartheid South Africa was selling weapons there too, but they'll never talk about it. So when we talk of the DRC, I think South Africa has been playing what I will call a role of pacifying those armed groups that have been growing every time, coming from Nkunda in 2012, 2013, to Bosco, to the current leader who was a member of the Electoral Commission, and he formed an alliance and fight against Tshisekedi. So that's the history, if you have to understand. And the role of Rwanda, the role of Burundi, Uganda, the role of Zimbabwe, there were many countries that were involved in the DRC. South Africa stood the question of, we need international morality, we need a rule of law in this country, we need to build democracy in this country. There was none.
You know, you talk about the role of Rwanda, and I think I want to focus on that. One of the things that we talk about a lot when we talk about Rwanda is this country that has, you know, a fast-growing economy, in terms of being able to supply services to its own people, getting a lot of, gold stars from many on the continent. But what this particular matter does for Rwanda in the bigger scheme of things, benefits and also disadvantages for the image of Rwanda when we're talking about Rwandan-backed M23 rebels. That's how people are reporting.
Absolutely, but you see that Rwanda is very close to the EU. Rwanda was supported by the EU in Mozambique. There was a crisis in Mozambique for the past 3 months, but we have never seen the EU and Rwanda dealing with the electoral crisis because there is natural resources. The same like in the Eastern DRC. It's the same question that you ask yourself. These armed groups are backed up by Rwanda that never wanted the SADC mission there. Remember that Rwanda, when the SADC mission was being mooted to say we need a SADC mission, the UN mission must phase out of the DRC because they've been there since 1960. Lumumba was killed when the UN mission was there. And that's how funny it is that you find that the people of DRC, they have the faith on the people of SADC because they've joined the SADC. They didn't join East Africa Community first. They've joined the SADC first because they knew that they will be supported by those neighboring countries, including Tanzania, including Malawi, including Namibia, including Zambia. But when you look at the question of the DRC, like I said, it's a very complex issue that within an hour we cannot deal with the DRC because it is a country of interest to the superpowers, to the multinationals, to what I call mercenaries of war, dogs of war, that they are benefiting out of this conflict. And it will be difficult for us to say, is it only Rwanda that is playing a negative role? You find that even Uganda, it is playing the negative role. You find that the role of, like I said, of Belgium, of the of the US, you know, you will find that the superpowers have an interest in the DRC because of its abundance of natural resources. And that's how, as South Africa, we could have capitalized on dealing with those interests for the benefit of the region and of the AU. We have been talking about silencing of the guns by 2030. 5 years from now, are we going to silence guns in the Congo when we still have arms cache being purchased by the Europeans, stealing the natural resources of Congo under the pretext of humanitarian aid and the pretext of international mediation?
Sure, that's. I mean, that's when you talk about the pretense, that's very concerning. We're going to take calls, right? 010-594-6010. Anonymous is on the line in Bloemfontein. Anonymous, I believe that you used to be a member of the SANDF yourself.
Yes, hello Naledi, how are you?
I'm well, sir. Thank you so much for calling. What are your thoughts?
Yes, Naledi, we've been waiting for this to happen for so long. You know what is the problem? These people that are talking about resources, they are lying. We are always, before going out, there is a place we call CTC in Postmaster. We're going to prepare it. Last year, the fire burned everything. Our equipment is burned. 2023 years. That equipment were never replaced. And everything, vehicles were burned. The government didn't come on board. Again, another thing, uniform. We don't have uniform, everything is banned. Another thing, when we are doing training in CTC, go out there and look the situation there. There's no vehicles, there's no sleeping quarters, there's no water there. Another thing, last thing, if you see a military convoy going somewhere, you will see lots of vehicles stacked along the road. All vehicles. They are throwing each other, they are doing it in Clippiwan Road to just from here, from Fontaine to go to Luwak. You travel for 4 days, stacked along the road. When you talk, they say channel of command. That channel of command, it doesn't work. It doesn't exist. Thank you very much.
Just a second, Anonymous. So are you talking about challenges that you had experienced in the DRC particularly?
That is why I'm saying these challenges that started from here. Preparation. We cannot go there where rest are not released.
Yeah. But are you talking about burnt vehicles in the DRC, Anonymous?
Yes, I'm talking about this thing of DRC. We've been waiting for that to happen. Because of that DRC thing, you cannot just go there like you are going to ShopRite.
Okay, all right.
Understand?
I think I get the point that you're making. Thank you so much for calling. Anonymous is in Bloemfontein. We're going to take this conversation forward. We're taking your WhatsApps as well. 072-110-5584 or give us a call 010-594-6010. What can our troops do to assist the situation in the DRC? More on the other side. All right, welcome back. Of course, we continue with our discussion as we look at the unfolding situation in the DRC, where we've seen the alleged M23 rebel group launching a full-scale attack on troops to seize control in Goma. This is, of course, in the DRC. We've seen loss of lives for South African troops that are there, as well as some for peacekeepers. And we continue our conversation with Advocate Sipho Mantula, who is an international relations expert, Christian Rumu, who is a senior campaigner with Amnesty International, and Helmut Heitman, who is a military expert. Helmut, I'll come back to you. Christian, thanks for being patient with us as well, and we'll come to you in a moment. Okay, we've got another Anonymous on the line. Okay, let's do that first. Earlier we spoke to another Anonymous in Bloemfontein, who said that he is claims to be part of the SANDF. Another Anonymous now calling, saying that he's a former member now of the SANDF. Anonymous, good evening. Thank you for calling.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate your time. Yes.
Thank you so much. I just want to share a comment rather than a question.
Sure.
And I want to attest to what Anonymous spoke about earlier, but to add more on that. My first thing here is that we're having military superiors that have never ever experienced what actually war is. You're getting a civilian minister. I'm not saying they don't know what they're doing, but it is easy for them to be told by other people who don't want to be held accountable that, yes, we are capable for war. South African soldiers are very well trained, but the equipment is appalling. It is poor. When they come for an inspection, they are given vehicles that are not operating anymore, just for the parade. When a minister comes, they see numbers, but they don't see the capacity, meaning we're not operating. Right now, we don't have air support in DRC. So people are going to, unfortunately, be in this situation. 2013, the same thing happened. We lost 13 members in the DRC because of lack of ammunition. Even now, there's no ammunition. It is the same thing. It's almost as if you go to the DRC, you have to know there's a 50-50 chance of you not coming back. And unfortunately, because of our pay cuts, a lot of us have to go there because our families are looking at us. And that's the only way to make a little bit of extra. So for me, I feel as if our leaders have ulterior motives for protecting whatever interest they have there. Because when we come back, we are forced to sign non-disclosure agreements, and we cannot speak about the things that happen there, which are very unorthodox.
Yeah. Anonymous, we appreciate your input. Thank you so much for calling. Helmut, a lot for you to respond to there. Anonymous, earlier, the gentleman saying that, well, from the very beginning, when we send our troops into the DRC, there simply isn't enough preparation. The second caller, who also says that she was a former member of the SANDF, says that a lot of the vehicles that we see, for instance, are available for parade, but not necessarily functional for a war situation. She says you've got military superiors that don't understand the war on the ground. I mean, your thoughts in response to that, and certainly what you think needs to be done moving forward, because the tensions in the DRC are not going away, it seems.
Well, look, I can't speak for the current minister, for instance, but I do know that all the previous ministers, and I worked with all of them since Joe Modise, and the chiefs of the Defence Force and the service chiefs, Army, Air Force, Navy chiefs, they have repeatedly told Cabinet, told the President, told Parliament even, that the machine is going to start breaking down because we're not funding it, we can't maintain equipment, we can't train properly. For instance, pilots can't fly enough to be really competent. Ships that don't go to sea, the crew isn't fully competent. Individually, yes, every member is properly trained, but they haven't gelled as a crew. Army units need to actually do a lot of field training exercises to really get used to what they do in an operational situation, let alone in combat. We're not doing any of that. We haven't got the money to look after the equipment. We are lacking some capabilities. For instance, electronic counter drone equipment. We just don't have any. We don't have a precision missile for the Rooivalk. So even if the Rooivalk was operational, it doesn't have a standoff capability. Ditto with the Gripen. So it's perfectly correct. The equipment situation is bad, to put it mildly. So far, we've gotten away with things because there are people in the Defence Force who work minor miracles on a daily basis to keep the machine running. But you can't do it forever. In fact, if you go back, the previous chief of the Navy, actually in a press conference with the then minister sitting next to him, said by a certain few years down the line, which is about now, we will no longer have operational frigates or submarines because they're not being maintained. There's no money. They will stop. The fighters weren't flying because there was no support contract. Armscor hadn't gotten on to organizing a support contract. Now, probably some of the generals are falling down on the job, but most of them have been pretty open, certainly with the politicians. And I mean, during the defense review, I was on the committee. We were very hard in informing the Prime Minister, the President, I beg your pardon, and the parliamentary committees of the status of the Defence Force, of the problems. I feel terribly sorry for the soldiers who are stuck with inadequate equipment, malfunctioning equipment, apparently also ammunition shortages. But that is what happens if you try to play a regional power role when you're funding something slightly souped up border guard, which is what we're doing. The cabinet has delusions of grandeur and needs to come back down to reality. It's not the fault of the soldiers. I'm sure they're going to try and blame the soldiers, but it's not the fault of the soldiers when these things go wrong.
Helmut, but thank you for that. I know that you do need to leave us, so we appreciate the time that you've given us. Christian, let's come back to you. I'm looking at, what some of the latest is to come out of Amnesty International, and I see here a call for, the Rwandan-backed armed group and the Congolese army that was made by Amnesty International asking them to stop using explosive weapons in densely populated areas. Obviously, that call being made by Amnesty International for the interest of civilians. But I wonder whether or not a group such as yourselves are actually given a seat at the table to have discussions with authorities in a place like the DRC. When was the last time Amnesty International was actually given an ear by authorities? And I mean physically in one room.
I mean, we engage with authorities in DRC on various issues, including, the mining sector and this issue in particular on, conflicts in the east and some parts in the west. On this particular one, we try to engage with them on the use of explosives in densely populated areas, a report that you have alluded to that we published last week. And we did not receive any response from that particular research that was done, that was looking at, the use of unguided missiles by both the DRC forces and M23 between January of 2024 and July of the same year. So we have seen quite the both sides not wanting to engage on that particular issue. And we believe that is a very problematic position, because it's really putting civilians in these densely populated areas at risk. We have received, for example, today a report of a hospital that was hit by a projectile in Goma. And there could be one casualty of a child who was impacted by that projectile. So this continued to be an issue, and authorities and both the M23 that is backed by Rwanda and DRC authorities seems to be not wanting to listen to that call of not using these explosives.
Yeah, because I'm seeing here the data being, and this is according to Amnesty International, 150 times explosive being used, 150 times in a 7-month period. When that's astronomical if you actually think about just how many times that could be in a week, for instance, or within one particular month. So very, very concerning. Then there's the question, Christian, around where you do have loss of lives, particularly of civilians, and that's where my focus then needs to be, is the probability, the plausibility of us seeing accountability. I know it's a lot of abilities, but essentially what I'm looking for is when civilian lives are lost, the likelihood of seeing justice.
It has been more than 30 years, this crisis in the region. So, and we have been really pushing for justice and accountability for the past 30 years. And why this crisis continue to occur, it's because there is lack of accountability. The previous invitees were talking about the role of Rwanda, the role of the region actors. There is simply no accountability that we have seen in the DRC that could give us that hope that this crisis will end, or that will have accountability in the future. The International Criminal Court, the ICC, last year issued a statement saying that they've reopened their investigation into the DRC. So we really do hope that through that process, they will really investigate, the use of these explosives in densely populated areas and other human rights violations on both sides, to ensure that there is accountability. Right. Because without accountability of the M23, of their backing, being backed by Rwanda, of other actors in the region that are creating this destabilization that's having an impact on civilians, we are not going to see an end of this suffering of the populations in the region.
What is the SANDF costing the annual South African budget? And so just if we look at, I suppose, the entire sort of allocation, there is reports that if the SANDF in and of itself is underfunded, what would it look like then with the resources that it takes into place like the DRC? We're going to move towards starting to close this conversation up. So if you'd like to give us a call, you've got about 8 more minutes to do so. 010-594-6010. Take a short break. We'll take the conversation forward on the other side of this. Welcome back. You are still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. We continue to look at growing tensions in the DRC, particularly in Ghana, where M23 rebels allegedly going into the Goma area. And allegations, of course, that there has been attacks on troops. We know that South African lives have been lost there. Members of the SANDF taking your calls on 010-594-6010. Well, we've got Anonymous on the line from Rwanda. Anonymous, good evening. Thank you so much for calling. What are your thoughts?
Good evening. How are you doing?
I'm well, sir. Talk to us.
I'm very fine. Yeah, I'm a South African citizen. I was just wanting to put my views as well here on this issue. Like currently today, what I saw many parties, soldiers, parties at the Congo soldiers. They were handing in weapons. They were being welcomed in Rwanda by the police, by some of the soldiers in Rwanda. And there by Goma, I saw some of the forces are putting white flags showing the M23 that they are not fighting with them. Even the M23 is saying they are not fighting with South Africa and other parts. You see, so now like that, the way I saw there, only civilians that are still protecting the town. They are the ones that are fighting with
the citizens,
with the M23. You see.
And you are in Rwanda at the moment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'm currently.
Sure. Anonymous calling in from Rwanda, and Anonymous saying that what he is noting, information that is being shared from his vantage point in Rwanda, is that it is citizens trying to protect their homes and their town. And Innocent is in Bethel. Innocent, good evening. Making me bite my tongue there. Go ahead to talk to us.
Yeah, umongameli wethu ignorant kuma views wamanye ama political party kade bemtshela ukuthi akabuyisa amasotsha from le DRC. Whatever I mixela wona le compared to impilo zamasotsha esinawo, impilo zamasotsha abizwa ngama breadwinner back la ekhaya ayisho lutho. Akawabuyise, we are not fully equipped. Now checka ukulwa kweRussia ne-Ukraine kusebenza ama-drone lapho. So asina technology enough. Njengoba basho bathi imoto isebenzisela for i-parade, for show off. Uma kufika ku-real life akufani, situation i-reality ne-parade akufani. So mina mababuyiswe bazoprotecta, because manje whoever is sponsoring lama rebellious or whatever lama M23 uzojika athi okay kusho South Africa iyayingena lento abuya jikele thina la siyini thina nawubheka labantwana bebantu base DRC bathuthi ikhwama njengoba basho bathi into abayaziyo kulwa kuphela ayisekho into ubakhuluma necolleague yakho ukuthi into abayaziyo yimpi abasekho impilo abayaziyo ngaphandle kwempi. And then lokho kubaphusha ukuthi beze bamigrate beze South Africa beze kwamanye amazwe la ngaliwa khona. Ngiyabonga msakazi Thuba.
Ngiyabonga mina Budam, thank you so much for calling. Innocent in Bethel there, making the point that it is time. He believes that the president should make the decision to bring these troops back home. I want to actually move towards closing it off, but quickly a few WhatsApps that have come in. Let's take a look. Eustace M. from Davidson says, good evening, Naledi and your guests. My question is, how can you send South African soldiers to war, not a peacekeeping mission, worse without air support, all airborne counter product that, okay, I can't see the rest of that WhatsApp. We'll see. More of those on 072-110-5584. Some technical glitches there, but I'm going to give, because I want you to be our final thought here in studio with us. But Christian, perhaps the recommendations at this point from Amnesty International, about a minute, if you will.
Really, the priority should be to protect civilians and to ensure humanitarian access We know that the M23 has issued in its statement claiming the victory on Goma, they suspended activities on Lake Kivu, which is one of the routes people are using to flee Goma. So that could impede the people who want to flee Goma to seek refuge in Bukavu, for instance. So we really do call on all parties to ensure that civilians are protected. Journalists, human rights defenders, critics of M23 and Rwanda are protected during this period, and should and facilitate humanitarian access that is much needed in Goma.
Yeah, we really do appreciate your time. Christian Rumude of Amnesty International, senior campaigner, speaking to us from Nairobi in Kenya. Advocate Mantula, the solution.
Naledi,
right?
I think on the solution, viewers who have commented on the aging equipment, I think they were correct. It is all about Treasury to look at their checks and balances, how to start to fund our own defense troops outside the country and even inside. Recommendation of the truth and reconciliation, what I call transitional justice, it is needed in Congo. You need the peace process to go back, as you know, that South African ambassador to the UN yesterday emphasized on Rwanda process, Kenyan process, to say bring back all the fighting parties to the table. Cessation of hostilities that was agreed last year should be brought back, because the issue is to agree in terms of territorial integrity of Congo. As Lumumba said in 1960, we are fighting for the Congo. We are fighting for the children of Congo to be safe and to enjoy their natural resources. Secondly, I think the question of the role of religious movement there to push for the peace building and for healing, and for the families in South Africa who have lost their loved ones. We know that it is a tough time, Naledi. It is not just to talk about that they have lost their lives, but they were fighting for this country. They were heroes ultimately. They were not villains, they were heroes. And it is important that we know that in any war, there is always a price. Casualties are there, but it is important for us to engage on this question of DRC. Like I have said, we've got hidden faces and hidden hands that are involved in this conflict of Congo, and they are the ultimate beneficiaries. But it is important for South African troops not to be pulled out, because this is part of the SADC mission. All the SADC member states must contribute equally, and Angola, as a mediator, must come to the party now. I think it is important for the president of Angola not to just talk, but walk that talk and assist the people of the Great Lakes.
Yeah, and I'll help you finish off that thought there during the ad break. Of course, Advocate Mantula also saying the importance of continuing to talk about what's happening in the DRC, and for our own media houses on the continent to keep highlighting the matter. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Advocate Sipho Mantula, international relations expert, Christian Rumu, senior campaigner with Amnesty International as well. With that, we wrap this conversation up, but we do have your headlines at the top of the hour. Stay with us on Newsfeed PM, the late edition.